So King Kong is now 20 years old. That is 2 decades. Actually, it's 19 years, but I'm just rounding it up a little bit because, you know, it makes the title of this video seem a lot cooler. Needless to say, this movie came out quite a bit ago, and it's hard to believe how fast time flies by. I've done a lot of Godzilla content on this channel and a couple of Godzilla retrospectives, but I wanted to give some shine to our boy Kong, because Kong is the title character in Godzilla x Kong: The New Empire, and he's predominantly in that movie. So I feel like it's a great opportunity to take a look back at Peter Jackson's King Kong movie. Of course, we all know the first King Kong movie came out decades and decades ago, back in 1933, which was a claymation movie which also influenced Godzilla as well, but that's another story for another time. Kong has been around for a long time, even having a remake in the 1970s, which was an entirely suitmation movie, all the way to when Japan did their suitmation movie with King Kong Escapes. Many other interpretations that have come after that point with the new modern day MonsterVerse King Kong. My experience with the character is that I've always grown up with this movie, and I've grown up with some of the Japanese Kong movies, which was King Kong Escapes and obviously Godzilla vs. King Kong, which were two of my favorite movies growing up, and Godzilla vs. King Kong is actually still my top 10 Godzilla movies of all time. But that's a discussion for another time as we discuss Peter Jackson's King Kong in detail. But this is more of a highlight reel. It's not getting too much into the overall plot and story of these characters. I'm just talking about things that I find particularly interesting and still hold up very well to this day, because one thing I want to tell you guys right off the bat is that this is a phenomenal movie. That being said, I want to get some of my negatives out of the way before I get to some of my positives, because I have a lot of positive in this movie and I kind of want to balance it out just a little bit. King Kong stars Jack Black's character Carl, a failing filmmaker, as he discovers a mysterious island known as Skull Island. He and a boat crew's discovery of Skull Island, they encounter a 25-foot gorilla known as King Kong and other prehistoric creatures that inhabit the terrain. Kong forms a relationship with Anne, one of the actors in Carl's movie crew, and is used as bait to lure Kong and take him to New York. Introducing the 8th wonder of the world, Kong escapes the theater, climbs the Empire State Building, where he is shot and killed, teaching Carl a lesson at the end of the day. Much like the 1933 film, King Kong is actually a very simple premise. And my synopsis was actually a lot shorter than the movie, because let me tell you right now, that's actually my biggest complaint of this movie, is that it's a 3-hour movie. And don't get me wrong, I like monster movies. I really do. And one of my favorite movies of all time, The Batman, don't at me, is a 3-hour long movie. But King Kong ain't got nothing to say for 3 hours. I mean, you don't need this movie to be 3 hours. Like, 3 hours? Why is this movie 3 hours? Godzilla Minus One is even 3 hours, and that's a phenomenal movie. Don't get me wrong, I still think this is really good, but that's a major complaint, is that it really drags out quite a bit in the pacing of this movie. And most of the pacing is due to a lot of these characters. There's a lot of characters in this movie, unnecessary amount of characters, because most of the characters in this movie are just there to pad out the running time. A lot of them are not significant to other characters, and a lot of them are not really significant to the plot either. A lot of them are there to be cannon fodder, just to kind of pad out their running time, like I said, and some of them are there to just be killed by King Kong. Now, you do have some crucial players like Jack Black's character, or Jack the love interest, which I'm not a big fan of the love interest in this movie, by the way. I never thought that they had good chemistry. But all in all, a lot of them are there just to fill in that runtime. And it, again, for a 3-hour movie, it's really tedious at times. And as phenomenal as the action scenes are in this movie, I gotta say, with as much as Anne gets thrown around in this movie, I'm surprised that she didn't either A, get crushed by the pressure of King Kong in many instances, or B, her neck didn't snap with how much he's throwing her around. Because there's moments where he's throwing her around where I'm like, okay, you're dead. Also, this is just a nitpick, and this isn't even anything major to the movie itself, because it is a phenomenal movie, but I really wanted to see Carl die. And that also gives compliment to Jack Black's character, because this shows that Jack Black can play more than just a comedian. Alright, all my negatives are out the way, time to talk about the positives. This is still a fantastic monster movie that still holds up very, very well. I rewatched this and I was like, man, like, I can't believe how good this was. I was honestly shocked.
And I gotta tell you, it was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
I thought it was just childhood nostalgia that made this good, but there's a lot of elements I want to discuss with you guys that I think make this movie stand out and still stand the test of time. First of all, this movie is a visual spectacle, right? Skull Island is so unique in its character. It's a character in and of itself. You have a very prehistoric feeling world that also feels like something that could be a little bit tangible at some times, like the giant insects and the giant animals are very tangible in many moments, and also feels kind of majestic with the way it has like prehistoric dinosaurs or creatures in there, and maybe some plants that, you know, would have thought have been died or killed off by changes in climate. It's a world that definitely feels like it's just been discovered. It has a lot of visual spectacle to it that I think that the other King Kong movies after this point have not been able to replicate super well or even give their own unique take on. I do think the visual effects in this movie are also still very phenomenal. Like, looking at this, I'm like, man, Kong looks fantastic. A lot of the monsters look fantastic, especially a particular scene that I don't want to talk about right now, but I'll talk about a little bit later, where the visual effects also very much highlight that as well. And I believe Andy Serkis did the motion capture for Kong, as well as participating in the actual film as well, outside of just doing motion capture. And the way they convey Kong's body language with his environment or with other characters, and the way he interacts with things, even simple things like when he kills an animal, he kind of plays around with the jaw, which the reference to the original, but they make it seem a little bit more playful in this one. And also how discussing how great Kong is in this movie. The action scenes in this movie are phenomenal. I think that this movie, though I love the fights that we have now, and they're great in and of their own right, rewatching this movie, this fight has the most epic and well choreographed monster fights I think I've seen in a big budget monster movie of all time. Especially that Kong versus V-Rex fight, that is so iconic and it's just cemented itself in history for such a long time that when people think of King Kong fights, that's what they think of. And especially when I think of greatest monster fights of all time, I think of the Kong versus V-Rex fight, especially the iconic jaw snap. Just phenomenal action sequence. Obviously, the best character moments in this movie are due to Anne and Kong's relationship growing in this movie, as a point where Anne, first meets Kong and is obviously, believably and understandably terrified of this 25-foot gorilla coming up and just snatching you up as a human sacrifice. But then the two get to actually know each other throughout the story and kind of have a mutual respect for each other, and ends up caring for this character by the end of the movie. Even before then, and I thought it added the emotional weight that this movie needed, and that's where the emotional heart to this movie is. It's within its monster and its main lead woman. And Jack Black's character, though slimy, I gotta say, is a treat in this movie. I mean, the way he just kind of slimes his way through things, and when people die and he still tries to shoot this movie, it's just he's so hateable, especially when he captures Kong. He's a very hateable character, and he's doing it for his own reasons. He's doing it because he's a very selfish character. It's all about him and creating, a name for himself. And characters like that, you can absolutely despise, and you do despise him in this movie. But Jack Black plays it so well that I can't help but not to like him in some of these moments, because he's really good. It's also scarier than I remember when I was kind of looking back, because I was kind of like, like with the natives, I'm not gonna lie, that's another element to this that I don't like. It's just how creepy the natives are, like unreasonably creepy. Like, it's to the point where it's kind of demonic, and I'm not sure if I'm like down with that, because it just really makes them seem unnecessarily creepy at points.
Look, chocolate. You like chocolate?
I guess that adds to more of the fear factor of this overall movie, I guess. But the one scene I will say is brilliant and still holds up, and I showed this to a friend of mine a couple of days ago, and that is the insect pit scene. Because it's like every insect fear you could have, but just magnified, because they themselves are magnified. They're huge, especially, you know, the giant crickets and the, oh my god, the leeches. The leeches when they ate Andy Serkis, that scene just still gets to me to this day. Also, though I'm giving like so many high praises and so many happy moments that I had watching this movie does end on a very sad note. I mean, if you've seen the 1933 original, this is very much a recreation of that, and adds on a very, very tragic note, you know, with King Kong being on top of the Empire State Building and dying. But with the exception of the original movie, I never felt any emotional connection to anybody. This movie did a better job establishing that connection between Ann and Kong, to the point where you feel terrible when it happens. And if a monster movie can make you feel terrible for its leading monster dying, then I think it did a good job. The ending line, you know, it was beauty that killed the beast, though I may never understand what that line means, and I'm not gonna Google it, because I mean, I don't wanna be like having people in the comments going, oh, you Googled it. Yeah, I Googled it.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
That line was taken from the 1933 original as well, and was a great homage because it's acknowledging it's a remake, and a very well done one. This to me is like the -1 of the original Kong movie. And what I mean by that, it's like it takes every element of that original and just amplifies it times 100. The biggest problem being that it takes that runtime and amplifies it times 100. But it's still a very phenomenal movie. It's a fantastic monster, adventure, action movie that feels a lot more than what it actually is. And Peter Jackson really directed the heck out of this. I love this movie with burning passion. And after 20 years, yes, it still holds up very, very well. And it's the most cinema feeling Kong movie I've ever seen, and one of the most cinema feeling monster movies I've ever seen. It's phenomenal, and I love Godzilla, always have. But I will say that personality wise and character wise, in terms of their overall personality and their presence, Godzilla has that presence, that's that power fantasy, and that's why I've always loved that character. I adore him, and I always loved the allegory for the nuclear destruction. Kong is not a monster per se. He's a big animal, and I find that to be more relatable as he is a primate. I don't know, I just always had a soft spot for King Kong as well. I mean, I love Godzilla, but also really like King Kong as well. So ultimately, what do you guys think of Peter Jackson's King Kong? Do you guys still think it holds up after 20-ish years? And what was your favorite scene from that movie? Because my boy, I think this is still phenomenal.